My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 37 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed my life was built on something solid. Maybe not perfect, but fair, balanced, earned. I wasn't married, but after 9 years together, that distinction felt technical at best. Lucas and I had built a life that looked permanent from the outside. Shared routines, shared stress, shared plans that stretched years ahead, all spoken in the casual, future tense people use when they assume nothing can interrupt it. I met Lucas in the tech industry. He worked in sales strategy. I ran operations. Different personalities, different strengths, but we fit, or at least I thought we did. His father, Robert Hale, owned a mid-sized manufacturing company he'd built over 30 years. 200 employees. Strong reputation. Not flashy, but respected. 5 years into my relationship with Lucas, Robert approached me with an offer I didn't want. He wanted me to become chief operating officer. I was doing well in tech, comfortable, safe, but Robert was persistent. He said the company needed modernization, systems, discipline, someone who understood scale and process, someone he could trust. Lucas encouraged it, told me it would be good for us, good for our future. So I took the job. The pay cut was real, but Robert promised equity, profit sharing, a stake in something lasting. Nothing formal, just words, but spoken with conviction. For 4 years, I worked harder than I ever had. I modernized workflows, cut waste, improved margins, grew the company nearly 40%. Robert and I built a real partnership, long evenings talking strategy, planning succession, debating growth. Lucas worked there too, in senior sales. We kept things professional. Separate lanes. It worked. Until it didn't. 3 weeks ago, Robert died suddenly at his desk. Massive heart attack. 62. Healthy. Gone in minutes. The funeral was enormous. I gave the eulogy. Lucas barely spoke. A week later, the will was read. The company went to Lucas. Only child. Expected. I assumed we'd continue together. I was wrong. 2 days later, Lucas called me into his father's office. His office now. He sat behind that massive oak desk like it had always belonged to him. "We need to talk about your role here," he said. That was the moment something broke. By Friday morning, my access badge didn't work. And as I stood outside the building I'd helped build for 4 years, swiping useless plastic against cold glass, I realized I had just been fired by the man I loved. I didn't scream. I didn't bang on the glass doors or demand someone fix it like I was some entitled executive who'd forgotten how humiliation works. I just stood there, badge in my hand, breath fogging the cold air, while Darren, the security guard I'd personally hired 2 years ago, avoided my eyes like he could spare me the shame by not witnessing it. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, I'm sorry. Your credentials were deactivated this morning." The words landed like a stamp. Final. I tried again anyway. Swipe. Red light. Swipe. Red light. Like persistence could rewrite what Lucas had decided in the quiet hours before sunrise. I stepped aside, pulled out my phone, and called him. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "Why doesn't my badge work?" My voice came out too steady, almost polite. That scared me more than anger would have. "I told you we needed to make changes," Lucas said. No softness, no hesitation, not even the courtesy of sounding guilty. "You locked me out without even a conversation." "We had a conversation." "That wasn't a conversation," I snapped. "That was you rehearsing a decision." Silence, then ice. "I've reassigned your projects. Your direct reports now report to the interim VP of operations I'm bringing in." Interim, VP, someone else in my seat. My stomach tightened. "Lucas, you can't just— there are contracts, vendor negotiations, safety audits, people depending on me." "They'll be fine." The way he said it, like the company was a toy he'd simply moved from one shelf to another. I swallowed, forced my voice to stop shaking. "What about my equity? The profit sharing your father promised?" A pause, and then the sentence I still hear in my sleep. "That was a verbal agreement, not in your contract." I felt my blood drain. "So what are you offering me?" 2 weeks severance. 2 weeks. 4 years of rebuilding a company's backbone, reduced to the corporate equivalent of a shrug. "This is insane," I breathed. "Is this about us? About what's happening between us?" "It's business," Lucas said. "Don't make it personal." "How can I not make it personal? You're my boyfriend. You watched me bleed for that company." Another pause. When he spoke again, his tone shifted. Not softer. Worse. Controlled. "You were my father's choice, Evelyn, not mine. And I'm done living in the shadow of what he wanted." And then he hung up. The call ended, and I stared at the screen like it might crack open and reveal the person I'd been speaking to, the Lucas I thought I knew. But there was no glitch, no mistake. This was him. That weekend passed in a blur of quiet dread. Lucas didn't come home. A text around midnight Friday. Staying at mom's. Need space. Space. Like what he'd done was a reasonable reaction to grief. I spent the next 2 days walking through our apartment like a ghost, touching ordinary things, our dog's leash, his coffee mug, the picture frame on the shelf, trying to understand how someone could be devastated by their father's death and still find the energy to destroy me with surgical precision. On Monday, I called an attorney, an employment lawyer who specialized in executive disputes, the kind who didn't flinch when I said words like COO and board bylaws. He listened quietly while I laid everything out, the role, the promises, the performance reviews, the sudden termination. When I finished, he sighed. At-will employment means he can fire you for almost any reason, he said. Verbal equity promises are hard to enforce unless there's proof, emails, written notes, anything. I have some, I said. Meeting notes. A few emails from Robert referencing your stake and profit sharing. Not a contract, but it's something. It could help, he admitted, but I'm going to be honest. This would be expensive, and the outcome isn't guaranteed. I stared at my kitchen counter. Our dog knows my knee like he could sense my heartbeat shifting into something sharper. What if there's more to it? I asked slowly. What if he's making decisions that put the company at risk? My lawyer paused. Like what? And that's when the memory hit me, harder than grief. The board meeting. The one scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. The one I had called 3 weeks ago, before Robert died, under my authority as COO, because I'd found something that didn't sit right. 6 weeks ago, during routine financial reviews, I noticed a pattern in Lucas's sales reporting. Not dramatic fraud, nothing flashy enough to trigger alarms, but consistent. Deals listed as closed that were still pending. Revenue booked that hadn't actually cleared. Forecasts tightened in a way that made his performance look exceptional when the real numbers were mediocre. I'd flagged it to Robert. He'd gone quiet, eyes narrowing the way they did when he smelled trouble. Prepare a full analysis, he'd said, and send it to the board before the quarterly review. So I did. I compiled everything. Contract statuses, timelines, discrepancies, and I sent the preliminary reports to the external board members the way I always did. Then Robert died. And in the chaos, I'd buried that problem under grief. Lucas hadn't. He'd buried me. My lawyer's voice pulled me back. Evelyn? I already gave evidence to the board, I said, slowly realizing what that meant. 3 weeks ago, before Robert died, before Lucas fired me. A beat. Then my lawyer's tone changed. Alert now. That's different, he said. If he's misrepresenting performance, that's potentially a breach of fiduciary duty. The board has an obligation to investigate. And if the board meeting is still happening, then you should attend, he said. Not as an employee, as a stakeholder with information the board needs. But I've been fired. You're not attending under Lucas's authority, he replied. You're attending under the board's authority. They can invite anyone they want. My hands tightened around my phone. For the first time since Friday, I felt something other than shock. I felt direction. Who's the board chairman? I asked. He checked his notes. Retired industry executive, Gerald Whitman, correct? Yes. I'd call him, my lawyer said, tonight. I waited until after dinner, not because I cared about timing, because I needed my voice steady. When Gerald answered, his voice was calm, professional. Ms. Carter, he said, like he'd been expecting me. I need to talk to you about Friday's meeting, I said. I was hoping you'd call, he replied. I reviewed the reports you sent. I have significant concerns. My throat tightened. Lucas fired me. Friday morning. Deactivated my badge. A pause, not surprise. That hurt in its own way. I heard rumors, Gerald said carefully, which only increases my concerns. I swallowed. Is the meeting still happening? It is, he said, and I want you there. But I don't work there anymore. You're not coming as an employee, he said firmly. You're coming as my guest. Your expertise is required for this discussion. My heart thudded once, heavy and slow, because suddenly this wasn't just heartbreak. This was the company Robert built, the employees who trusted me, the system I'd helped modernize. And Lucas, grieving or not, was now steering it with hands I no longer recognized. Okay, I said, I'll be there. Friday morning, I put on my best suit, not to look powerful, to remind myself I still was. When I arrived at the office, Darren's eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. I held my chin up. I'm here for the board meeting. He made a call, listened, then stepped aside and nodded. Inside, the hallway smelled the same: coffee, printer ink, faint metal from the manufacturing floor. But my body felt different walking through it, like I was trespassing in my own life. Lucas's assistant stood up sharply as I approached. "You can't be here," she hissed, eyes darting like she expected Lucas to appear and drag me out. "Board meeting," I said calmly. I was invited. I didn't wait for permission. I opened the conference room door. The 3 external board members were already seated. Gerald at the far end. Beside him, Dr. Helen Moore, a business professor, and Stephen Klein, a corporate governance attorney. And there, at the head of the table, like a king in a borrowed crown, sat Lucas. His face went white when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, half rising from his chair. Gerald didn't even look at him. "She's here at my invitation," he said. Then he turned to me. "Please sit down, Ms. Carter. We have a lot to discuss." And as I lowered myself into that chair, Lucas's eyes locked on mine, burning, confused, furious. In that moment, I realized something chilling. He hadn't fired me because he stopped loving me. He fired me because he thought I was the only person left who could expose what he'd been hiding. The room didn't explode. There was no shouting, no dramatic accusations. No one flipped a table or stormed out mid-sentence like they do in movies. What happened was worse. It was quiet, methodical, surgical. Gerald folded his hands on the table and looked directly at Lucas, not as a grieving son or a betrayed boyfriend, but as a CEO accountable to people who weren't emotionally invested in his story. "We're going to start with the sales figures you reported for Q3 and Q4, Gerald said calmly. "Ms. Carter flagged several inconsistencies 3 weeks ago. We'd like you to explain them." Lucas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "This is ridiculous. She's a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta." Gerald didn't blink. "These reports were submitted before your father passed away," he said evenly, "before Ms. Carter's termination. So let's remove the personal narrative and focus on the numbers." Dr. Moore tapped her tablet and projected several documents onto the screen. "Contracts, emails, timelines. According to this," she said, adjusting her glasses, "at least 30% of your reported closed deals were still in negotiation at the time they were booked as revenue." Lucas shrugged. "That's sales. You project close dates. You optimize forecasts. You don't book revenue on optimism," Stephen Klein cut in. "That's not aggressive forecasting. That's misrepresentation." Lucas's jaw tightened. My father knew how I worked. He approved my process. I spoke then, not loudly, not emotionally. 3 days before he died, I said, "Robert and I discussed these exact numbers." He was concerned. He asked me to prepare a full analysis. I turned my laptop toward the table and opened the email chain. "He approved an investigation," I continued. "Not this." Lucas slammed his hand on the table. "You're lying." Gerald leaned forward. "If you're going to accuse her of falsifying evidence, he said, "I strongly advise against it. These emails are time-stamped and archived." Silence fell over the room like a held breath. Gerald exhaled slowly. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "We're bringing in an external audit firm to review sales reporting for the past 3 years. Until that process is complete, you're restricted from making any major operational decisions without board approval." Lucas stood abruptly. "You can't do that. I own this company." "You own the shares," Stephen corrected. "The company itself has fiduciary obligations, and the bylaws your father drafted give this board full oversight authority in situations like this." Lucas's eyes snapped to me. "This is because I fired you," he hissed. "You're trying to destroy me." I met his gaze, steady and tired. "I'm trying to protect the company your father built," I said. "The same company you tried to protect yourself with lies." Gerald stood. Meeting adjourned. Lucas stormed out. I stayed. The audit took 3 weeks. 3 long, quiet weeks where Lucas avoided me completely. No texts, no calls, no apologies. Just lawyers. When the findings came back, they were worse than even I'd expected. Lucas hadn't inflated numbers once or twice. He'd done it consistently, quarter after quarter, always just enough to look exceptional, always small enough to avoid scrutiny. Bonuses, performance optics, positioning himself as the obvious heir. The board gave him a choice: resign as CEO with a severance package, or be terminated for cause. He resigned. 2 days later, Gerald called me. "We'd like you to return as interim CEO," he said. 6 months, while we conduct an external search. I agreed. Not because I wanted power, because I wanted closure. Lucas moved out while I was at work. No confrontation, no goodbye. He took his clothes, his laptop, his books, and left his apartment key and our shared dog's collar on the kitchen counter. There was a note. "I hope you're happy." I wasn't. I was calm, grounded. But happiness had nothing to do with it. We're in the middle of legal separation now. His lawyer claims I manipulated his father, that I stole the company from him. The audit findings tell a different story. The company is doing well, better actually. Without inflated numbers, we finally have a realistic picture of what needs fixing. The employees were shaken, but they rallied. They knew who'd shown up for them, who'd stayed late, who'd treated the business like something real, not a performance review. I'll leave when my 6 months are up. The board is finalizing a new CEO, someone external. No family, no history. And me? I'll move on. Back to tech. Or somewhere quieter, somewhere clean. The hardest lesson I learned isn't about business. It's about grief. Grief doesn't just break people. Sometimes it reveals them. Robert built safeguards into that company. Checks, balances, oversight, because he knew power without accountability rots fast. Those safeguards worked, exactly as he intended. I like to think he'd be proud of that, even if it cost him his son. And me, my future with him.